All right.
Wait a minute, give me a second, 2
Oh,
minutes.
sorry, I have to wait a second.
I gotta look around the room and see who is actually here, I'm sorry.
Yep. All right, well, welcome to the February 5th meeting of the Finance Committee. We'll have to give our clerk a second to write down names. We have a large crowd, but no, not that large. Okay, I lied. It's not that large. Madam Clerk, would you like to do a roll call from
I
your head?
will do a roll call.
She
for
will
you.
do a roll call.
Oh, forgot myself.
I'm playing the Jeopardy music. Can you
Dun,
hear it?
dun, dun. Okay, present are Joan Fonts, Marilyn Donahue, David Hurd, Tom Worthen, Jeff Tufts, Larry McDonald, and Bonnie Catulli.
Thank you very much. Is there any citizens here for citizens' participation? Disappointed once again. All right, well, we have to get the capital planning to come up here and talk to us a little bit about capital planning. So if you mind coming up here and introducing yourselves for those that don't know you, and we shall chat away.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm Jim Gibberti, Chair of the Capital Planning Committee.
Sandy Slavin, Capital Planning Committee.
Why don't you give us a little overview of the document you have, and one of the questions that's probably going to come up is what is a real pressing need, and what's more of a thing that we could put off. I mean, just give us a little overview of how you did this, and so we can get an idea of how we stand on capital.
Well, I could say that we just put stuff up on the wall and threw darts at it.
I don't think that's the case.
No, not exactly. We've contacted members of the committee. We've all been in touch with different department heads. The information that's on the sheets that were handed out to you is what we received back from the department heads, and in most cases with their backup. Items with the stars, as you can see the little legend there, it's funded but not completed, and a double star is approved and not funded. If they don't have any stars, it means it's on the Christmas list.
As you look through it, items that are numeric numbers that are underlined are what we consider to be high priorities for public safety. You'll see them under each one of the categories by each one of the departments, and underlining just indicates that we consider those to be the critical ones on the list. The last page is a summary of the capital request from all the departments through 5 years, including CETA, water pollution control, and items not in plan, which are detailed on the 5 preceding pages. But just wanted you to see the summary on the back. And your underlines are the criticals.
To simplify that just a little bit, rather than trying to find them all, it basically comes down to the IT department needs a UPS power supply and a phone system for the town because there's problems with the phone system overall. Those two items, $11,000 for the power supply unit and $26,000 for the phone system. Municipal maintenance has issues. They need a truck with a plow, $65,000. Video surveillance, because there's no real coverage at the maintenance barn. That's $30,000. and fuel pumps for $100,000, and that's basically to fuel the vehicles in town, particularly in the case of an emergency, as we had when we lost the power last year for that extended period. If they're trying to plow or they need gas, there's no place to get it. So this would, is something that they need, and they need better control over what they have. Police is critical on radios. That's a 58,656 number. Looking at 10 police cruisers for the partly sum of $416,000. Generator for the station, the amount of $54,000. The generator that's there broke down in the last one, and they can't really repair it. It's got an oil leak. They can repair it. It's got an oil leak, but it's not adequate to supply enough power for them to run if they have to go to the generator power. Our thought was that that generator that the police department has could possibly be used by another department in town that has a necessity for a generator, if that can be repaired economically. The school, they need a chairlift. That's for, is it Minot?
Minot.
For Minot. And this is for the handicapped kids. There's the level that they have to go up. The chairlift that they have can't be repaired anymore. It's gone. And then the minor little leak in the high school roof for 1.2. That total list of those things that I just went over amounts to $2,025,656. Take the school out of it, we're down to $800,000 on the remaining items that are there. I was just asked what the short-term plan was for money, and I think a bake sale probably is the only thing that I see on the horizon that's gonna work. Yeah.
You want to take questions from the committee? Anyone? We'll start with Joan. Any questions? All right. Mr. Hurd?
Nope.
Mr. Worthing?
No, I'm just trying to digest it here.
Anybody, just, if anybody's got one, because yes, Mrs. Cattouli.
You want to explain, I guess I don't fully understand what the whole situation is with the Upper Cape here. We have replaced windows, Wareham share of the cost. How does that factor in? I know that we had to establish a capital plan or capital, whatever, account with Upper Cape. And I thought that was being taken care of internally. Do we understand the logistics of how this works and how this works into our capital plan ourselves?
Well, it was in there, it's been in there as a capital item because it is a capital item. For Upper Cape, our portion is $30,000, and we decided to recognize it, that it's a 5-year, at least 5-year commitment on that alone. I know Upper Cape will come in for other monies, but this was, I forget what that total package cost was when that came up.
I don't remember. But it's there
But
as
it
a
was appreciable.
placeholder to indicate that we have a commitment to fund a portion of their window replacement.
Okay, as a commitment, I mean,
Right.
can somebody explain to me what that means as our commitment? Do we get to ignore this commitment? Or is this a mandatory commitment?
It's a mandatory, as far as I understand.
It will increase our assessment by the $30,000.
Thank you for answering the question.
That's what it was, okay.
Last year, we talked about the new fuel pumps, and then it got put on hold. Where are we at with that now? Has it become,
It's the 100,000.
it's 100,000, but there was something, I know Tom had looked into that, the fuel pump. You were doing work on the fuel pumps.
Yeah, no, it got to the town meeting, or it didn't get to the town meeting. It got right up to the town meeting, but it got cut in the final June trimming,
Okay.
and it's still in the same position it was.
So they're currently functioning.
It works, it doesn't have the controls that than what they're suggesting would have, and it is not being supported by Scully Signal anymore, and it hasn't been for the last 4 or 5 years, so we're making parts for it, in effect.
And if in case you are going to look at the possibility of consolidating locations for fuel, then we need a way to record what other departments are pulling from this main site so we can bill back to the people that are sharing on our fuel. It can become one of the 1 or 2 sites to fuel, but we need to record how much is being used by the other departments to cross-bill. Right now, they can't do that.
By every vehicle,
Right.
we'll be able to control.
Yes. So we would know, they would know which vehicle is taking how much fuel at that time and whatever.
And you
But
get the
it's breaking-
mileage, and you could get preventive
Yeah,
maintenance
it's breaking
tied into
down
it.
on them, yes. Yeah.
It's the next generation of really the military standard of
Yeah.
control. However, it's $100,000.
Just a question, I'm not privy to what's happened in the past on this, but any thought that we could equip one of the local gas stations, say, with a generator and use them for 24-hour service? And because not only are we having the cost of maintaining this equipment, but we also have the potential groundwater issues that can be millions of dollars that we could be on the hook for if we own the supply. So is there I don't know if that had been investigated at all.
I believe that was discussed last year when this came up, and if anybody on the board would like to talk to
I don't
their
even
findings
know,
on it.
I don't even know how I believe Mr. Worthing brought it up, equipping the problem was there are some tax implications here because we pay less for our fuel than in the other ones. I also believe one tank is it not above ground tank with a containment system?
Actually, we have new tanks. We
Okay.
have new double wall tanks.
Right.
They have been installed
In the ground.
in the ground.
Okay, they're not above ground.
But we have a police department has it, the fire department, both fire departments have them.
Fire department is not the town.
I
They can't-
understand that. but
I know
I'm
you
telling
do, but
we're
you,
the town, as the town, where
okay.
fuel is.
But the point is, we have one at, I believe, the municipal maintenance barn, is that where it's located, and at the police station. So they do have 2 locations, and they were using, while we didn't have an electronic way of reporting it, they were supposed to be writing it down when somebody got one. I know that was, that's not happening, but that was what was discussed. We didn't, there was a long discussion about using a gas station in town, but when their power goes out, they're no help to us. So,
Or their supply.
or their supply for that matter. So this is just, was come up with the best. I don't know why it ended up not getting on the warrant.
Well, it just seems that there are a lot of issues when you're running a fuel station, which is essentially what you're doing. You have to worry about ordering supply, you have to hedge. When you buy it, you have to, worry about the containment. So it's just a thought that, that's a service that we don't have to be necessarily worrying about. That if you just purchase the tanks, that's another thing. But in the future, I'd love to see it go, have someone else worry about it. Yeah, and you would pay a throughput.
Right.
Yeah, that 10 cents a gallon that gets added on there, or 5 cents a gallon doesn't usually match the cost of all these other things that we have to do to go along.
And you
with
get your tax back. You can
Yeah.
get the tax.
I think we just put that on the agenda because that's obviously something we need to revisit again.
Good point.
Did we not pass an article or have for the school roof, the high school roof?
That was for the gym.
No, this one we were talking about repairing the school roof. We were getting matching funds. It's in the process.
There'll have to be an article coming to the Springtown meeting.
Right, but they're in the process of doing that one now, because I believe there was a grant we applied for that pays part of it, and the rest of it is, I don't know, I'll have to have school committee, but I remember the conversation about it. about the school roof. It wasn't the high school gym roof, it was the actual roof that they were gonna repair because the principal appeared before the selectmen to discuss that they had put together a plan which included state money at some level, special grants, so that's something we might want to factor in here too, because if that's the way they're going to do it,
We had a meeting with the director, the school director, and that was not mentioned.
No, it was not.
That's, I
Yeah.
thought that's the 1.2, don't you have something?
That 1.2 had been there for a couple of years, and it was not changed after the discussion with her to bring this up to date.
okay.
She added other things and took things off, but that was not modified.
That's probably something we need to find out about anyway, because I'm pretty sure that's something out there we need to do. As far as the capital for the water pollution control facility, that's something they're going to have to budget in their budget, correct?
That's
Right,
totally
Right,
them.
correct.
okay,
Same thing with CETA, totally them. That's why they're kept separate for out of the town total.
okay. Sure.
Yeah, the question on the school department capital items, I see there's a lot of items, obviously, that go to a particular school, or there's a couple of schools. If those are packaged together, can they go for school building assistant funds, or, you know, as part of a
That I don't know.
reimbursable package, or is there just nothing
know.
left from
Don't
the
know,
state?
again, that this, in the discussion with the superintendent, that particular issue was never brought up. And never suggested for, from her, so I honestly don't know.
I'm sorry to keep on speaking from the crowd, but I know they've, for some of the funding, the HVAC, the boilers, things like that, they've looked into it. There's also the National Grid program, which will be giving 2% more back than what the 68% for the MSBA for those programs. So they have been looking into those as well, and trying to get the most return on the dollars and the most reimbursements.
I'm just a little curious, and I don't know whether you can answer this question. There's a, under the school, it says technology replacement required by state, and that's $250,000 per year. Do we know any details on that? And if it's required by state, why isn't it considered a high priority? It says technology replacement required by state.
Well, as far as it being a high priority, it is a high priority for her. We didn't include it as a high priority on this because her emphasis was on specifically the highest priorities with the chairlift and the roof.
Okay. I'm just curious, because it's, I mean,
That was
that's a
all.
commitment over the next 5 years, and I'm just curious as to if it's required by state. If it's a state mandate, then obviously that's not something we're gonna get away with doing. So, I'm a little curious. Thank you.
Back to your roof memory. This was weren't we just putting together $50,000 or $65,000 to get the engineers, state engineers to come in and look at the high school roof?
That's correct.
And as a result of that, have we gotten any results back from that as to what?
That failed at town meeting. I don't think that passed at town meeting.
That we didn't even put it on the warrant because we figured out there was a Sullivan-Kimberly agreement to pay the $45,000 or whatever we figured it was going to be. And I assumed that was going ahead. And after that was going ahead, the state was going to put in like $400,000 of the total, some significant amount. So we don't know what the high school roof is sitting here.
Yeah, I
We know
actually,
it's something less than $1.2 million.
I know that there was actually a reimbursement of, I think, I want to say 85% by the state. Nope.
No, I think,
That was the
Okay, that's why I was wrong. But I remember that we didn't have to put the article in because the deal was made to get the study, but
our anticipated full costs for it should be around $400,000 to $500,000 of what we would actually have to fund. It's all going to depend on how the reimbursements are handled the end, we are funding borrowing the lowest possible amount. Again, that's depending on the MSBA.
Do you know where that stands at all?
I fully believe that we're moving forward on it. We saw
Okay.
them at the MMA, and I think that's one of the items listed, so.
So we're gonna borrow money to do that, it looks
We're
like.
gonna borrow money for the difference between the reimbursement is what I want to do.
Yep,
with the
okay.
plan. As you know, what I want doesn't always happen, so.
All right. Any more questions?
No.
Yes.
Under the treasurer's office, we have replaced existing financial software. And this is something that we've actually been aware of, that there's a real lack. This would only include, what will the 350,000 include? Do we know? I mean, obviously, there's going to have to be more training. Is this it's the software. Maybe who's getting up to answer it or not. And you guys are put on the spot with this.
Yeah.
I don't expect you to know all the details about it, so just curious if anyone else.
All it was, really, we didn't get into the training aspect of it, whether or not training was gonna be necessary. The software was the focus of the discussion, and it was software only, and that was where it started and ended with the,
But it would replace our existing financial system. That's correct.
yes.
Okay, that's what, so many times we hear comments about, they don't understand why things don't get done, and they're looking at the people running the software, but in a lot of times, it's the software and the issues with the software.
Right now, it's too slow responsive. It
Right.
doesn't give them a full
Thank you.
multi-year reporting and stuff like that. So they're saying that you gotta give us more beef behind. We're not saying replace Vadar. I
No,
don't think that's being
I
said.
think it is replacing
I don't
Vadar.
think that was being said.
I think it's been
This is
said.
the accounting system.
That is, okay.
But that's very,
Yeah, it is.
No.
It will replace, if it doesn't replace Vadar, then we're not gonna gain anything out of it.
What John was saying, I believe, is that Vadar works well, but it's too slow and it doesn't have the reporting capability
Yeah.
that they need. It's good for what it does, but it doesn't do what we need it to do. And it doesn't work well enough, they can't combine everything together as they're trying to do.
It's a database.
The
That's what it
database
is,
is
basically a database, and anything you have to use, you have to extract from Vadar. And if you look at most of the financial reporting we get, it looks like it's coming off of Excel. So
It is.
It is,
Exactly
I
what's
know,
going
so I was just trying to be nice.
Yeah.
It looks like it's coming off of Excel, so this would allow them to accomplish more with less work.
Right.
And again, efficiencies is something we need to consider this. And
Vadar, I believe Vadar only holds information up to a year for history. And after that, they have to transfer it someplace else and go
Combine
hunt
it,
for it.
yeah.
They can't push a button and get the reports that they need or people want. It becomes a real onerous project.
we've had numerous discussions about that as a committee here, because that's one of the issues that I think would benefit everyone in this town as far as getting things done, is the ability for the system to do more of the work and less work being done by the people. It makes you look a lot better too when you get a report out like that, and not instead of having to build it for 5 hours, so.
Absolutely.
One of the things we're working on, just so you know, one of the reasons I wanted you guys to come in, we could have got most of what you have, but we're trying to, this committee is not happy with the budget if we reduce the 2 point, and now it's, I believe it's 2.5, but I don't want to ruin the surprise. Mr. Sullivan's going to bring us okay, well, this doesn't allow us for any capital, this doesn't allow us for any kind of stability fund, and so we wanted to get an idea of the capital, so that when we look at the process for a 5-year period of time, then maybe we can look at a revenue adjustment that would encompass capital as well as stability, and move forward 5 years. That's what we're real interested in the town, everybody working together towards the same goal, and that's and I appreciate you bringing this to us, and come and talk to us about it.
I'm happy to do it. I mean, as I say, the bake sale's probably high on the list right at the moment.
I'll do what I can. I make cheesecakes, I'll bring one. I'm sure, yes.
Larry, on the water pollution control, he's got 250,000 in his budget for capital, or does he not?
The water pollution control, he basically funds all his own stuff through his, it's on here so that everybody's aware of the numbers involved in all of the departments. So instead of trying to keep that hidden as a.
So we don't have to
It's off
lose
the
sleep
agenda.
over that particular one.
You can if you want to, but you don't have to.
Okay.
Yeah, that definitely is going to be funded. It is an enterprise fund, so therefore any capital will come out of that.
Yeah.
But I tell you, one of the things that kind of jumps out at me, this is just me, if I'm understanding this correct, I think we have 6 workers in municipal maintenance. You have more pieces of equipment than we have workers. And that concerns me because I understand that, I know that there's replacements as you go along for some of these, but that's a lot of equipment with 6 people.
Well, it would be if all of those pieces of equipment were gonna be used at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. I understand what you're saying, but if we don't see, I understand what you're saying. I'll leave it at that.
We know that the 1 ton they want to replace has holes in the floor, has no heat, and it's very difficult to get out there in cold, snowy weather and plow when that uncomfortable. You're saying if the vehicle's falling apart like that, how much longer will it run?
I agree.
Yeah.
Things like that, there's no
Yeah.
doubt about that. The other thing I was going to ask, and this is, do we have equipment, a list of equipment that we could possibly sell, auction, do anything with? Because clearly, if we're just buying it, we're not, and we have a reasonably good maintenance department, so. So, that means that the equipment's in halfway decent shape. Do we have any way to dispose of assets? Or is there any list of assets that we could possibly turn into a revenue source?
I think that question goes to the town administrator.
Yes.
Yeah, I would,
just to say.
well, I would say, from the looks of some of the equipment that we have around
Excuse
here
me.
and what they're using, I mean, from a junk standpoint,
Bake sale? Yeah, okay.
that's where you're going. I mean, that's,
So what do you
I
say?
don't- we don't have anything that, at least that I'm
It's not worth,
consciously aware of.
not worth anything.
That's worth anything. We may, you get rid of a dump truck, you may turn the one in, but what are you doing? All you're doing is having somebody pick it up for zero. But the bottom line is, because they play with their numbers, and it's still gonna come out, as far as the cost to us, is gonna be pretty much the same. It's just gonna be how they phrase it.
Can you ask us? Okay,
He
sorry,
wants to
Jeff.
finish.
Okay.
Wait, can you ask the same question about buildings?
Sure.
Everything
Well-
the town owns?
Is there a building we want to sell, is that what you're asking?
I'm sure we have building and land that we probably will have to hang on to for a while, but that might be a question for Derek. Mr. Sullivan, what do you think?
Hello. The question was about sale of buildings and such?
Assets. The assets we talked about as equipment, and now I'm taking it a step further, buildings.
Yeah, I'd say there's no plans to sell any of them at this point, and that would go through the Board of Selectmen. They actually would have to vote on any of the buildings
Well,
or do it.
I understand that, but we don't even have do we have a list of buildings that are currently underutilized or not being used at all, and whether we should be holding on to them, marketing them, or what should we be doing about them?
Well-
It's not gonna be revenue next year, but in the horizon of this
The
thing,
look
it
for
could
them
be.
is how to repurpose them to make them work for the town instead of a one-time, maybe you get $100,000 for Everett. That's not going to help. However, maybe
we do something where we can change that building into something that works for the town and can bring maybe some nonprofits and such in the town and help the folks. So it's we always need to look at the purpose of things, not just on the pure cash value, but on what it can bring to the town. So.
Thank you.
We had talked about, just in passing, and I know people have talked about having a set amount in a perfect world, having a set amount, that percentage of the budget going towards capital items. And that might, and I'm sure it will, need to be done in small increments until you get to a point. I'm not familiar with your ranking system, but if you were to put these in order so that, we could say work down them, do you have a recommendation like that, or do you just go with the underlined ones first?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have a recommendation where I can say the UPS power supply, for example, would be number one, and then chronologically. Because you've got health and safety issues. You look at the police, they need radios just for the communications throughout the department. Maintenance needs, what do you want to rank high there? Video surveillance is a possible, but fuel pumps, from what Dave has told us, seems to be one of the higher priorities. The dump truck with the plow, he's looking at that particular item because it essentially replaces two older vehicles. Instead of getting a pickup truck and a plow truck, he's going to one that's universal. The phone system isn't compatible throughout. There's been problems with it. They can't get parts for it now. It's another one of those ones that's on the downslope.
Jim, I think at the last meeting when we were going through them, we sort of all spoke that the safety and health was sort of the number one priority, including the ambulance and the police items. Potentially having our police officers out there with the radios that don't work could be it could really cost somebody their life. One of our employees, maybe somebody from our general public. So we'd like to protect the police officers that work hard for us, and make sure that the residents as well are protected by giving them the proper gear. Now that doesn't mean giving them gold bedazzled items or anything like that. But what it does mean is giving them the proper tools to do the job and to be safe while they're on their shifts. Because I think I don't think it's unknown. We have one of the most gorgeous towns around. We also have agricultural land, which you can hike for miles or get lost on ATVs. That's what's happened before. And we also have the crime of inner cities. So those are some of the things that we forget. So a massive land mass with pockets of crime that are potential safety hazard to those that we employ and our residents. So that's our top one. Just to pick up on the truck, I don't mean to keep jumping around here, but just to pick up on the dump and plow, when that gets replaced, what happens with that vehicle? Does that immediately come off? It doesn't stay in the fleet somewhere and is used as an example in a few years down the road that this one needs to be replaced again.
Theoretically, it should be traded in.
That's what we usually do. We'll get it declared surplus property, or we'll have to get it appraised. I think the last one cost us $200, but to get appraised, but you have to follow the procurement laws in doing that.
Right. Well, I mean, you can take the registration off and park it.
Right.
All right. So if pickup number 9 is replaced with the new pickup number 9, the old number 9 is gone.
Usually what we have been doing with the police cruisers when we replace them as well is also having a value of the trade-in on there. we have some old Crown Vics that some of our departments use, but usually the cost of, let's call it decommissioning those, it's not worth it.
Right.
We have a list of rolling stock, do we not?
Yeah, for Maya,
I'd like to see that.
Yeah.
yeah, for Maya, we have all our plates, everything that's registered. Susan Green in my office hunts people down, goes crazy when they don't turn in the blue plates. Because like anybody, until we've got our plates in and such, you usually can't cancel your insurance. And why should we pay an extra $500 a year? So-
Can we get that electronically, and then I'll pass it around to the committee, the rolling stock? Because I know we had it at one point last year, but it may.
The police got one. We got one.
Well, it's not just the police. I want we had a whole list of rolling stock going all
Yeah,
over
we
the
have
town.
everything from the trailers that we have, so.
Yeah, and usually you would redact the license plate of the undercover cars, something like that.
Updated one.
And now, what about the funding, as far as lease purchase and bonding, and, how much can we stretch on these items? I look at it this way, you mentioned the phone system. Well, and that, we could rank this, everyone's got a different opinion, we could rank it in all
Exactly.
different places. But it's also one of the things that destroys our credibility, when you can't even call a department without having a problem. It hurts. It's certainly, it doesn't build trust with the public, So, but when you do those items, and if we stretch now and do it with bonding, I don't know what your bond limit is, how much further you can go, but if we do that, and we at least see things happening, people see things moving forward, and you don't have police officers out there without the proper tools, and you don't have a treasurer or an accountant that can't run a program, to check what was happening in 13 months ago. So even though there's an interest cost, there's still there's a productivity boost and a morale boost too with you doing it, so.
I think when we get into the budget discussion, that's probably going to come up, because we could do a combination of debt and, we can bond, or we can go through the lease, or we can go through a time purchase, versus some of these we might be able to buy straight out but again, right now, if we reduce $2.9 million out of the budget, we got no capital at all. So, that becomes a problem. So that's when we get into the budget discussion. As far as what we know now, we know what we're looking for. As far as capital, it's just a matter of figuring out how to get to that capital.
Well,
As an aside, you can see now, like, we don't have a ranking of what's number one.
Everything's number one.
Exactly. I mean, that's,
well, for instance, I know that, you can't necessarily bond a police car, but, you might be able to.
There were some bonding issues, wasn't there, Levi?
Yeah.
Some bonding issues about lease, that the bond can't outrun the lease, or.
Right, you have a life of this
Yeah.
particular vehicle. The
Right.
last time we've been purchasing them, they've been through capital leases, so lease purchases. So that's why in the FY15 budget, you'll see $100,000, and that's for the next round of capital leases. However, that will probably, depending if we can stretch it for 3 years, might get us 5 vehicles, so.
All right, that's what I was looking for, is what we can stretch that out, so.
I think two of the biggest issues is we don't, and we haven't. The haven't is really more important. We haven't had a program for purchasing and replacing police vehicles or school buses. And these are two items that, as we can see from the lack of attention they've had over the years, that now we're at a point where replacing them is a much more difficult task, because you're replacing more, as opposed to somewhere down the line, if we'd have done this for 10 years, we might be replacing 2. Now we're looking at 5. Now we're looking at, 5 buses every year for a period of time before we.
and those two items have been a football for the last 20 years.
Yeah, I read the papers, so I don't want to bring it up, but
I'll bring it up. Go
well,
ahead.
are those buses being used for revenue in the summer? And where's that shown? Like, are we renting them out to day camps? We are.
They have a revolving.
Yeah,
fund
Cape
for
League
that.
baseball,
Those go to them? Okay.
yeah.
See, this is one, and I agree, we need to have a little more visibility on that. But one of the issues is that revolving fund is also used for repairing the buses. So, and it takes a lot to keep these buses on the road, in case you haven't read that article.
No, I know.
So we're in a crux once again, where we have vehicles that have to be repaired. The school has found a way through a revolving fund. We don't have that luxury in the town side. So, you know,
You'll
see,
see
I'm in,
one capital item Sergeant Joe brought forward from the Board of Health to, this is where it's interesting. They're looking to lease, not lease purchase, but lease, let's call it a Toyota Corolla for $199 a month, no money down as part of their revolving fund from the rental inspection program. However, we can't do that because it has to go before the town meeting. So we're holding off on that. We're gonna actually bring a $199 a month, let's call it $2,500 a year lease for it. It's pretty interesting. Now, we didn't
Get a
think.
Prius like you.
That's more expensive, unfortunately.
I guess my inclination is to get out of the business if we can.
Oh, I've been down that road very.
Yeah, so I'm not, I know that's not an argument for tonight, but I just don't see us, I just
You
don't.
might want to review
it-
that material. I think we've
I-
got that around
Yeah.
somewhere.
yeah, that has been one of the longest running battles in this town.
Yeah.
And I can assure you that they've looked at it from every different way. And one of the things you need, with a lot of the things we've talked about, you need up front is money, and we don't have it. So we do what we need to get out of this thing where we're strapped down so far that we don't have any capital, we don't have any way to better ourselves, because it takes money to better yourself, and we don't have it. So we need to get out of that mode somehow or another, and that's why we're here tonight. So
I got one little point.
yes, go ahead.
I just happened to notice it with two things, actually. You know, the whole thing with the police generator, I can probably remember probably 3-4 years ago
That's when it started.
when it failed the first time, and I sat in that room across the hall downstairs saying, is it a safety factor? And they thought they found the money at the time for an emergency replacement. No. That to me is a big priority, because we've heard about, Middleborough lost their phone system, whatever. They relied on Wareham, and, you could have a tri-town area go out and only one, station be working. So that's a big priority with me, and it was at the time a relatively small ticket item. So I'm a little saddened by that. But my other major item here is, I happen to notice, what I write it over here, okay. The rehab of the onset pier, I find it a little strange that he would push that out 4 years. That's a $3.1 million item. And I think that, we need to keep that in the back of our mind every time we dip into these waterways funds here and there, because the harbor master came to us a couple of years ago and said, told us that structurally it's got issues, and that these misuse, or whatever you want to, creative use of those waterway funds. Did I say that? I'm sorry. All right.
I don't think you need to say that.
Creative use of these waterways funds, when they should be going to this whole structural situation. So while we're looking at the next 3 or 4 years down the road, I think we need to be careful of how we use those funds if we're going to fund a $3.1 million rehab of that pier someday.
Well, I actually believe, and this is, I will answer you this. I don't think we misuse the funds, and I think our harbor master is very good about making sure. He came before us the last time he came in and kept mentioning that we need to be careful how we spend the funds. He said himself, because this is what we're looking at in the very near future. So, I think he's watching the funds, and maybe that's a discussion we need to have with him, because most of what's on the harbor master's capital is going to come out of his funds.
Yeah,
Unless I misunderstood him in our conversation with him, he's also looking to try to get some federal funds.
Federal funding and
but
grants.
Those are always,
That's
we know
why.
how this game plays.
But that's why.
They're gonna give you so much.
That's why this
if you
3.1
match
is
it.
sitting there as a placeholder, so that you're aware that there's a potential for that
Exactly.
outfit.
I was just surprised that you hadn't listed that out on the extraordinary side over here. If I hadn't noticed so many
It
zeros
may
next
wind
to
up
it.
there. It may wind up there because it keeps getting pushed as money becomes tighter. They don't have any
Exactly.
forward movement on the other.
It's
I
really a
just-
valid point, and one of the things we need to keep in mind is with the parking kiosks and such, when everybody says, well, that's going to, now we can do trash pickup, now we can do more beach pickup. We're trying to expand the program, and we're also trying to see how we can use those revenues. And one of them may be to try and help put some of those reserve funds towards the pier, because don't forget, that's where the kiosks, at least,
Exactly.
you know?
The
so-
pier falls down, so does the parking.
Yep.
That was my point. I happened to look through this and I'm like, that stuck out to me and I'm thinking to myself, you know, people need to be aware of this. You know, we're on public with, I know nobody actually watches us, sure. But, you know, do they really?
3 reporters and a selectman who has to be here because he's a liaison, so that's pretty much it.
You know, that's part of the total sum, and that's down the road. And if we're gonna make plans and we're gonna find a way to straighten out our situation, that's sitting out there. And people need to be aware of that.
Any more, one more? Yes, sir.
I'd like to point out that the Capital Planning Committee looked very carefully at all the items on this list, and it was with a lot of reluctance that we cut a lot of the items that we've been talking about tonight. Looked at it very carefully and said, what do we really need? And we looked at life safety, we looked at the preservation of our assets, including the high school and the high school roof. If the committee had its choice, we would be spending a lot more money if we had it. So I want to point out that the committee really looked very carefully and made some very hard decisions in coming up with the list that we came up with. Mr. Gabberty and the rest of the committee struggled with this because there are a lot of areas that need capital improvements within the town. The list that came before you is bare bones, and the committee felt that it had made a valiant effort to keep it at a reasonable level at this point.
Yes,
It's a
sir.
reasonable level that doesn't float.
Hold on, Marilyn.
I'm curious, do you have a copy of the rough draft of the items that were kicked off of it? And I ask that only, not that we're second guessing you, because I appreciate this list seems very basic to me. These are the same items that we've been asking for money and not been able to do. But I think people need to understand what we're not even talking about anymore. I mean, these are the things that couldn't even make the cut. That's how desperate we are with some of these items. So I'm just curious, at some point, if you could get that to me, I'd appreciate that.
Basically, the items are on here. I mean, the list, this one is the ones that are the high priority
Okay,
that we determined at this point in time. That's the underlined that show up in here, but it's tough to pick them out unless you're going line by line on everything
Okay.
with the
All right,
underlines.
thanks.
This is just a summary of the underlying things.
There's
Everything else
a,
didn't make the cut.
okay,
there's a 6-page list.
yep,
Which
okay.
everybody
And the ones
has.
that are underlined are the ones that we desperately need and
Yeah.
probably still can't even afford those.
Correct.
Yeah, if I could come-
And that's why Mr. Gabberty is here tonight, because one of the things I've preached about for years now is that we don't put any money into our infrastructure, we don't take care of our needs, and we end up with lists like this where $2.1 million looks like a small amount of change, but we still don't have the money to do the 2.1. So, you know, we have to get creative, and I think we've had a conversation or two where, you know, you've got a combination of debt, putting it in debt and some straight out if you have the money to do it. And in the past, and I'm sure Mr. Gabberty can talk more about this, in the past, the way it works is they make recommendations to the town administrator who brings it forward at town meeting. In the past, it didn't always work out the way that it should have.
Well, in the past, if you want, it depends on how far back you want to go past. I mean, in the past, it was, we would wait until, like a week before town meeting, essentially, and find out what the free cash was gonna be. And out of the free cash, what do we have to spend on capital? And, you know, you come up with a zero that's gonna come out of free cash, then there's zero that's going to capital. You know, really, there wasn't many alternatives. The last, I think, Major purchase of over $1 million when we went into capital, but that was, the funding on that was, we had a bond issue coming up on the school, was being retired, so we just continued that on and used that money for capital and picked up something for about 4 different departments. And
Yeah,
ambulance-
it was
Dollars
$1 million
you wanted to
that I wanted to
spend.
spend, see? I got to spend it, but not anything fun.
Yeah, but the interesting part was that when the debt exclusion came up. However, when we funded the new items, we didn't do it as a debt exclusion. We did it as a simple capital line. So realistically, we lost money on that. We lost revenue sources on it. So,
So
that if you look at
I'll
it,
put that in your log of things that you didn't do correctly or something.
He wasn't here.
He was using that "we" generously.
The other thing I want to point out too, and I keep hearing about debt ceiling, and I heard this before, and I don't know if anybody watched past finance committee meetings when someone, former town administrator, would bring up, we've got a lot of room for debt. We got a lot of room under our debt ceiling, and it would just eat me up because it's like having a credit card with $1,200 and saying, well, I got $1,200. You don't have $1,200. If you can't afford to pay the $1,200 back, you don't go out and get $1,200 worth of debt. So we have to balance that. But I think between that's why we're all here, and that's why I'd like to keep Mr. Gibberti and his committee in our loop as we go through the budget process, because, you know, we're, like it or not, we're going into town meeting with 2 budgets, and one of them is cutting everything out, and the other one is going to try to show some capital as well as some stability, because we need to start looking towards the future instead of just trying to dig the hole or fill in the hole a little at a time. So. So I would very much like to keep you in there with emails, and because now that we have a list, we have a little more to work with as we work through the budget process. Any more questions before we let them out of this hot room?
yeah, the sky's the limit on the debt ceiling, but our ability to
Yeah.
pay is not. So
It's very good to have this list, but the hard work is spreading it, given the expected ability to service it, to take care of it.
Well,
Eh,
those are 2 whole different things, obviously.
Well, who goes through and says, okay, if you only had X, how would you spend it? Do the department
Administrator.
heads get involved in that or not?
Town administrator does
The
that.
town administrator is the one that gets involved primarily on that end of it.
That's how the process works.
So we're gonna see a revision to this that will,
You'll probably get, revisions to this are ongoing. I mean, this is pretty much of a living document that will change. Some of the items on here for FY16, for example, may well not be on here next year. They may have been gone, they may have been changed, the direction may have changed. Something may have come up that makes it viable to do it. We've had a lot of changes between this document and the one we had last year.
last week we had, Dave Menard was in here looking for $800 and plus thousand on the Parker Mill Dam, or whatever they call it. And now I see it's 5 years out.
Well,
Wait.
it's 5 years out because
is that listed as 5 years out, or is
I
it
think
listed
it
as
should
one of
have
the
been-
major items?
Is-
Is in the final column over there to the
Yeah.
It's in the
Is that
extraordinary
off the
dollar.
list?
Yeah, that means you need it today.
Yeah.
However, it's an extraordinary item, and we're not putting that balance into our every year account. So that's why you see it all the way. That's not pushed out 5 years. That should have been done years ago.
And is Makepeace involved as a part owner of that? Have we determined who owns that dam and who's responsible for it?
When we get through and have all the information on that, I'm sure we'll bring it forward.
Good.
Any other questions before we let Mr. Gibberti go?
That's a disaster if that thing goes.
Well, we thank you for coming, and we hope to keep you in the loop, so I will copy you on all that, so, because I want to make sure that, you know, when it comes down to it, we're all in this together, and I think it's a song from High School Musical 2 or something, I don't remember.
hope somebody's got the
I have
pad.
no clue what you're talking about.
And we'll talk about the bake sale later.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is Mr. Sullivan and our committee talking about the budget. Before you get started, I got a couple things I want to go over. Okay, but even if you didn't get it printed, everybody got it in the email. Pay attention over there. Come on, children. Put the gum on the nose. Everybody got a copy of the framework for the budget process. It's not perfect, but and without getting into the numbers, this is kind of the framework we're going to use as a committee to review the budget. That they're going to prepare this in this framework and bring it to us, and that's what we're going to look at if that's acceptable. But I just want to go through it briefly to see
Is this the option 1 through?
Yes, this is the option. Okay, so what the framework is there's going to be an option 1, which is reduce the now it's $2.5 million deficit from the existing school and general government, and then project it out over 5 years, including all known or approximate changes to key indicators. The reason for that is that I don't believe that we can go into town meeting with a 2015 budget, either one of these options, without a 5-year plan backing it up. People aren't looking for what you're going to do in 15. They're looking for that plus what you're doing going forward. So I think that's why I put it in the framework, and I think that's where we're going to see a little bit of that tonight. The other is an option 2 with the override in it, or let's go with debt revenue adjustment, because even though it upsets Bonnie, but it's a combination. It's reducing some of the current budgeted items, and the way I want to look at that is to identify areas that need to be eliminated, restarted, or restructured, and that will serve the town better long term and be more efficient and cost us less money. And we want to emphasize the cost savings or avoidance and a good sound physical plan. But again, we want a 5-year plan backing that. What you're going to see tonight is a 5-year plan with a number that we picked, but it doesn't have any reductions. So you can see what happens if you try to, I've heard the comment, and I'm not going to quote any names out there or anything like that, like Justin Bieber or any of these names like that, but I heard the comment was, well, if we just give them the money, we're gonna come back for us for more. And based on that logic in there is if you just put an override or debt revenue adjustment in it, and you don't take care of some of the issues you have in this town and change the efficiency, do some combinations, look to get things restructured, you'll see what happens. They're right. You'll come back with a deficit in two or 3 years. So that's why it has to be a combination of the two. And so we'll see that in a minute. Now, we got the 5-year capital plan tonight, which adds a new element to it. So, yeah, I know. It's you can't ignore your infrastructure for 10 years. You just can't, because now this is where we are. And you just can't. And then we need to pursue alternate methods of revenue, expense reduction, shared mitigation, regionalization, cooperative arrangements, identify and attack weak areas that need improvement. I think that's, I had a brief conversation with the superintendent before I came in here, and they're already in the process of doing that. And I know Mr. Sullivan is in the process of doing that as well. So, and then we just have to learn and explore ways to reverse poor trends, poor things that we're doing. Projected over 5 years, and then we need to be smart enough to, with a 5-year plan, to build in benchmarks and be able to build in a method of communications to the taxpayers as well as the shareholders, which is the employees and the committees. And then just a general is the identify tax effect of the potential override when we develop that number, and possible methods to reduce impact to fixed income taxpayers. Marilyn brought up a good point that we have to look at being able to go to people that are on more fixed incomes and not having the impact as much on them. But I don't know how that, I'd be really unwise to tell you I have a plan for that, because I don't. And that's something that we're going to have to look to the treasurer and to the town administrator to develop that. And then somewhere in this process, and I don't think it comes from this committee as much, but we have to acknowledge that there's been poor physical management without really blaming anybody, but it's happened for a long time, and we need to assure the taxpayers of the commitment of the leadership team to see this plan through. And I think that has to be done in order to get anybody out there to believe in us and support us. And then we need to be prepared to answer questions and concerns. Anybody have any comments on that before we move into the real stuff? No, come on, Bonnie, you know you want to.
Oh, no, I don't. I mean, it sounds really good, but I think you missed the let's just go clean house comment. That was pretty good, too.
Yeah,
I don't know what house we were gonna clean, but whatever.
yeah.
Proceed.
We can't afford the cleaning supplies and we're out of brooms, so if you want to lend me a vacuum, I'm good, but other than that,
As much as I'd like to tell you that I read that, I know someone that does read it, and we have those discussions briefly. But one of the things I heard was that we were in process of planning an $8.9 million override. Now, I don't know. I mean, I kind of know where they got the number, but I don't have any idea how they connected the two dots, because that's not what I'm talking about, or I don't think that's anybody's talking about.
I think somebody should learn how to spell before they start criticizing.
Okay,
other
let's
people.
let's go out of the
moving on.
blocks. Let's move on. All right, Derek, tell us what you got for it. Wait, let me make sure there's nothing else I missed. I think we did that. 2014, 15 update, because I put 14 and, oh, that's right. Go into the budget, Derek. Let me sit over here and stew for a while.
So the first item that I'm bringing before this committee is the Upper Cape Cod Tech. They still are telling me they will not have a number out till March. However, if you remember last year, I think we had 33 extra kids going to Upper Cape Cod Tech from our school system, which resulted in a high assessment. Bourne is experiencing the same thing, except with approximately 70 kids, I believe, which means that our increase is more likely to be level, if not slightly decreased. So what I've done is taken level funding plus 35,000, which was for the windows. I know they said 30, but 35,000 is a rough number, and that gives us a $415,000 reduction in the deficit. So, first good news we've heard in a while. Now again, I don't have the official numbers, but that's what it looks like it would be trending more in line with. Because if you remember, Upper Cape Cod Tech said, well, we went up 2%. We were saying, well, how come we're going up 19%? Well, our portion of it grew because our number of students went in there, so we take a larger bite of the apple. So again, whereas Bourne is not only rising, it then almost decreases our share of the burden. So that's the first good item. What you have in front of you are two documents. The first one is called the Town of Wareham FY15 balanced budget with no revenue adjustment. Let's call it. And then included in that is a forecast from FY15 to 20. I want to make sure that I'm stating this. This is a draft. This does not represent any votes from the school committee or anything like that. So this is a pure draft. However, if you look, and the third column in, and during the copying, the shading of it went away. That's what we would be looking at for the FY15. You know, our revenues really haven't changed, so you'd start going to the third page, number 3 of 6, and as we go through the lines, made some small reductions to some of the departments, including general services. The small one to legal services, and that's for some of the labor items. And then when you go through it, one of the big things to balance the budgets would be the police versus what the FY15 request is. In order to balance this budget, we would look at we had 3 new hires budgeted for FY15. We would not be able to do that. This also includes another police officer reduction and a reduction in a lieutenant's position. So altogether, those worked out to roughly $250,000 There were more expenses requested, but we had reduced those as well. As you continue on, we also reduced the expenses to the municipal maintenance department. We removed one position in that department, as well as reduced some of the requested funding for the expenses. So when the expenses get reduced, that means less trimming on the side of the roads, less repair for the potholes, less items. So that's a direct hit to services, especially with reducing a staff member as well. Snow and ice wages remains increased. We're going to have to keep on increasing that till we get into an area where it's more within what our 3-year average would be. The major one is, if you look on page 5 of 6, definitely the Council on Aging, that department we would cease the funding for that. The senior daycare is somewhat self-funded. They do receive fees. It grows at approximately, the balance they had about approximately $30,000 a year, but without the Elder Services grant, most likely the senior daycare would be cut mid-year. So, continuing on to that, you would look at the library. That would be fully defunded. We would not be able to maintain that whatsoever. So that brings.
Can you give us a head count on the Council on Aging in the library?
People?
Yeah, actually,
The library's 5.
yeah, it's 5, plus there's some that are paid from some of the grants. The Council on Aging, I have one office manager, one, and then just one other employee that's paid out of the regular general fund. We had proposed for another part-time position in there, so that would result in 2.5 reductions. All in all, when I brought this down, I ended up with 101.667 employees, FTEs, excuse me, and that's a little over a 10% reduction in our workforce, because I think we were at approximately 111 at that before this.
Excuse me, and what is the effect on unemployment if we do it this way?
The unemployment right now is running at about $8,000 a month. So with the $300,000 that we have budgeted, we'd be able to absorb the extra costs on these. I think this worked out to be, when I looked at it, it was roughly $1 million in cuts, but not all of it was salary. The salary represented approximately $600,000. We used a 33% factor on there, so that was roughly the 190-200. However, this is, in order for this to be done, the school budget's going to have to be cut. Below level funding as well is in this draft, let's say, to make this work. So at some point we probably would have to make additional cuts, because if they're doing substantial cuts to their department, we would have to fund more in the unemployment. So
I also want to point out that was a gift, in a sense, from Upper Cape, because if you had to reduce another $400,000 out of this budget, it would have equated to a huge chunk, because you got nowhere else to get it.
yeah, so, and that's, I mean, again, I have no official number, but in the conversations and such, it's, I actually struggled with making that reduction, because I know that we've had the numbers given before and it has increased, but part of that's also based off of our population and our schools and such, so they seem fairly confident in this. The school, if you look at it, would be the net school spending would be level funded and then reduced by an additional $535,000. So all told, that's almost a $1.4 million reduction. Now, I have not accounted for the medical insurance, and that's probably when we start targeting I shouldn't say targeting, when we start knowing where the actual layoffs would come from, you can pull a report on what their benefits are and make the reduction based off of that, and move from medical insurance down to the unemployment. So that's where we'd have some offset in the savings. So that would be how we get to a level funded budget. Now, if projecting out, and if I can try and walk through this, the revenues again, we're a 3-year average of our growth is just under $350,000. We know we're going to pick up some new growth with Walmart at some point, but what we have to remember as well is the minute Walmart opens its doors in West Wareham, it's going to seek an abatement on its building and along the Cranberry Highway there. So we could have almost a neutral event for new taxes. Now there will be more build out from around the hotel as Makepeace increases that land. We are also going to get taxes by the land that the hotel sits on. That was not part of the TIF agreement, so we will be getting increased land taxes. The T. Marzetti, the total net of the tax benefit that they received is, I believe it's roughly $600. So we have a company that came in, brought in new jobs. I don't know if they've hired locally, because you cannot force a company to hire locally. That is illegal. So just so that people know. They are an S Corp, so most of their upgrades were their equipment, and you cannot tax on that equipment. It's exempt. So the actual increase of the values were approximately $100,000, of which I believe the 60%, if you take the 1077, so maybe I was being too generous. It's or not generous enough. Their tax abatement would be roughly $700 to $800 a year. So I'm guessing if they've got some hungry people in there eating at our restaurants, we've made that up.
So just to recap, if you look at this and go down to the bottom and do a 5-year projection, including
Correct.
15, you have an $8.7 million structural deficit, even if we reduce to quote unquote living within our means. So that means in 16 we'd have to reduce an additional close to $600,000 out of our budget. Then in 17 we're going to have to reduce 1.7 million out of our budget. In 18 we're going to have to get 2.7 million out of our budget. 19 we're going to do 3.7. You see where I'm going?
I see.
At some point in time, you no longer have any expenses to reduce, and it's coming very quickly if we don't do something. If we start, and I understand living within our means, and that's something we should always do, but we need to look at what our means are and how we can make it so that we can bring this town back, repair it and bring it back, because this is not going to happen if we just go in with what we have this year. It doesn't help us next year. It doesn't help us the following year, and it just gets worse. As a matter of fact, over 6 years, it's a $13.6 million structural deficit.
Yeah, just so if I can go over some of the assumptions on here so people understand. The salary increases I've projected at 2% annually. Expenses are of 1%. Retirement contribution, this is what it should be based off of the last time they pushed out to a little further, 8% per year. Our medical insurance is 7.32%. It would have been higher, but with the changes in the splits over the 6 years, we will save, with the new projected roughly $5,055,000 that the employees will be giving back to the town in benefits. So that is where we stand with that, and that's the factor that I've been using, letting you know, 7.32%. You'll see sometimes the overlay will increase during the triennial reval. You'll usually increase your overlay because that's when you'll have more abatements.
Is the school choice in that county, state, or where's the school choice? I didn't see it.
Yeah, if you look at the county and state assessments, that's school choice, and right now that's we've been going up approximately $400,000 a year. So if that's going to be one of the major ones, if we get that under control, just with the increases there, we're talking almost $500,000 a year going into the future.
But if we keep reducing the funding to the school because it's part of the budget, we're going to see more school choice, I think.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. At what point is there ever a point where you hit the attrition rate where you can't go because the other places can't keep on taking our students? So we may hit that at some point, but what does that mean? And that also, we know that some of the factors that help with new growth and assessments and values are education, safety, and such. We've already got. I mean, if you want to buy a 4,000 square foot house with a couple of acres, you can do it here. If you want to buy a waterfront house, you can do it here. You can do anything here, but we need to attract the people to buy here and keep on making it a even better place and retain those people that have lived here for generations as well, that have helped make it a good community. So.
Just going back to the cut in police, can you just review how many of those are live bodies? Because you had talked about adding 2, and then, but how many are vacant right now, and
yeah, it would be three that we wanted to bring back on board to replace officers that have retired or gone out. So that wouldn't, I guess you would not consider them live because they're projected hires. We have 1 lieutenant spot that's open right now because of the shift to the interim police, and that would be the one that we would not fill. Right. And then the other item would be 1 actual patrol officer that's currently working.
So it'd be a reduction of 5 total, 5 positions.
There'd be 5 total.
What about the summer police, obviously?
Yeah, the summer police, we have an issue because this year's funding, I can't get them in before July 1 with the way things are trending, and we have the most events that we've had in decades here. I mean, it's crazy. It's one of the few times I started looking at it and saying, do you bring more operational monies in? How can you do it? The harbor master is actually going to be trying to help out with some of his seasonals that they can afford to bring on because they use the waterways money for the seasonals. So it's getting bad. We're really taking on the line of safety versus dollars. So.
And this is the summer, what is it, the celebration, 2014 100-year celebration, and we had all these events planned, and we're clearly...
It's not just us, the canal celebration. I mean, we're talking about a massive celebration, fireworks that will that make ours look small. I mean, they're talking about their mortar rounds are 3 times the size of what we have for our annual fireworks celebration. It's similar to what they have at Boston. And guess what? You can see it right from onset. It's going to be gorgeous. So you better believe onset's going to be filled.
Oh, yeah. Any more questions? For the board? Is that shock and awe? Is that what the word we're going to use for this?
Yeah. Depressing.
We did not identify any large pots of money either. I can tell you that.
Yeah, and if you go to, this would now be called the Town of Wareham. Oh, and the other budget, just to let you know, there's only 1 capital line in there that's being funded, and that's the $100,000 in the police budget for new cruisers. There's no other capital monies. So.
Can we identify the next budget we're going to look at as the override without any reduction? It's just taking 2015 as it was and just adding $3.5 million just for a number to shoot at to see, the effect of not using any management
And we
skills.
picked 3.5 because,
We have a 2.9, then also we need to see if we can put some monies either away in our stabilization or start funding capital. So,
Okay, now this is with no cuts.
No cuts.
this is,
Thank you.
it's, well, the schools, I think the school's budget, they said they'd already had to make some reductions to make these lines. So I wouldn't call this the pie in the sky budget, but it's what was presented already and contained the $2.9 million deficit. So we'll go to the new start point of approximately 2.5 because we've already gone over the upper Cape. That
Okay.
override, no override, that doesn't matter. So when we go through all the items, what I'd actually ask is go to page 6 of 6. In year one with the FY15 requested funded, if you look at the bottom, between the change in the Upper Cape Cod Tech assessment and the extra 600,000, we would have $1 million surplus. $1 million surplus could go towards capital items, one-time purchases, and again, trying to put money in the stabilization fund to help with our bond rating and also to help with the DOR. So if we have issues in the future, we're not cutting $500,000 at the midpoint. Now here's where it gets interesting. You move into FY16. You have a $457,000 surplus. If you've bought any capital items and borrowed on those going into the future, that surplus would go down. 3 years out, you have a $360,000 deficit, so FY17. FY18, or 4 years out, we're looking at almost a 1.28, so almost a $1.3 million deficit. FY19, 2.3, FY20, 3.5. So $3.5 million is not going to carry the day and just make everything all right. We're going to have to make changes within our departments. We're going to still have to make cuts if an override passes, and we're still going to have to start making greater efficiencies. So I don't want everybody to think that if a $3.5 million override were to happen, everything's fine and we ride off into the sunset.
So this goes this way because of retirement costs and medical costs. Is that what's driving it?
Yeah, I'd say retirement, medical, and some of the other insurances, workers' comp insurance, and as well just our general liability.
And negotiating some of the contracts too will make this go up as well because we're in arrears.
We are in arrears. We've settled some of them through FY13, which means we're already arrears on everyone that we settled beforehand. And we have some that are multiple years out, including the largest one, which should cost-wise, which would be the police department.
So rather than having a 2.5% override, or 2.5% limit, we're going to go to a 12% limit on
No.
increase?
No, we're going to have to see how we make some of this work because we can cut out of some of the other departments. The health insurance.
No. I'm saying
Yeah.
for the revenue, on the revenue part. If we go up $3.5 million, that's a 10% increase in taxes. Right?
I think it shows
So
up as a
now
surcharge, though.
are we at a 12.5% increase in taxes?
I'm not proposing any increase in taxes.
No, but the override is,
The override would be $3.5 million.
which is 10% of the taxes, more.
Yes.
So now we're going up 2.5. We're now gonna, with this 3.5, if we go up 3.5, our rate of growth is now, this 3.5 is a one-time thing, or it keeps going, right?
It keeps on going into the future, and you grow 2.5% on top of that. So you'd have to go back to the revenues. If you go to the revenue page. So if you see with the 3.5 override, you know, our new growth, the 2.5 authorized, actually the FY16 didn't calculate out. So if you bring it out, now let's bring it out to the FY17. That's when you'd start picking it up. And then the FY18 and FY19. So if you see our slow growth before, 2.5 authorized, let's call it 790 in FY13 and 815 in FY14. You were only picking up what, a small amount of money from the authorized. So you'll see the greater growth in the other years. The FY16 is the one that's throwing off the whole projection. If
Yeah,
I
see
look
that.
at, yeah,
It's
it has
exact
to be.
number. Yeah,
So when we moved the new line of the 16 in there, I think it didn't calculate out. So
little hour.
no, well, if you carry that as a, I would say, yep. 8, you would have a, that would be a $180,000 difference right there, which would grow by 2.5% every year. Or $4,500. So if you bring that down to FY16, you would see that's actually a 630. Then in FY17, you would have probably a $175,000 deficit. And then FY18, a 1.09, and so forth and so on. So we can update these with the...
But it's still a deficit.
Yeah, we're still going with the deficit in the future, but this isn't, you know, when making the projections, they should calculate out, so I apologize to the committee that that's in there.
So I understand this. We go up the $3.5 million in fiscal year 16.
Yep.
And then everything after that is just at the, back to the 2.5?
Right, you don't go 10% every year.
Okay.
It's just 2.5 from there forward. So you have a one-time, let's say you have $1 million, and you're going to authorize an extra 100,000. Well, the next year you'd get, so you now have 1.1 million.
So
Next year you'd get 2.5% of the 1.1.
okay. So it's the override is a one-time event in terms of its gross amount.
The new revenue being brought into the whole lump is a one-time event, but that new revenue will still grow by 2.5% as it's part of the whole. But it would not grow by.
I think it grows 3.5 every year.
It grows 3.5 every year.
But wait, I think it's done similar to what CPC done, which is a surcharge on your taxes. I'm not positive on that.
No, it's 2.5%.
It's thrown into it?
The new growth brings you closer to the 3.4 to the 3.5%.
With not having the 3.5 in there, the 39 comes down to
Yeah, but
by 3.5 million.
the new growth is not raising existing people's taxes.
Right,
See,
it's not taxes, the levy base that
Yeah,
you're
but
allowed.
your new base, you're getting a new base with the,
Yeah.
with the 3.5, and you're getting a new base with the growth,
Right.
but you, I don't know if you really can say it's going up X%, because that new growth is, it's new to the, you know, it's new to the family, you know?
Right,
But
and
it's
if you,
$15 million over this period, right? Or more.
No, you've grown by $3.5 million.
Yeah.
So let's I think this is probably the easiest way to put it. You have $3.5 million from the override, right? The next year,
Times
The-
2.5.
yeah, that roughly, the value of what that originally, now you're at $3,587,000, not on top of the other $3.5 million, but that just keeps on going forward and growing by 2.5%. So don't let anybody tell you that you have 3.5%
I got you.
at
So it's like
3.5. Yeah, then next 7, then 10.5. No. You know, it's 3.5 million, then 3.58, then going forward. So,
Yeah.
Mr. Slavin,
Oh,
did he explain it right?
if I may?
Yeah, what basically happens is when you do an override, that override, I believe, goes into your taxable limit. So what happens is that money that was in there, you have 2.5 every year. That initial 3.5 million now becomes part of your tax base going forward. So every year you're paying 2.5%. You're allowed to increase your property tax levy, which comes in your property tax bills, by no more than 2.5%. You can actually use up to that amount of money there, but you're taking that 2.5% on that new total base, which includes that override.
It looks like it's $15+ million over the 5 years, if you just look at the 2 pages.
Well, remember, Tom, you got $3.5 million added to your base every year.
I understand that, yeah. So, and yet we're still going into the tank by $3 million.
But you remember
In the
the
fifth year.
exercise. Remember this is what you have to remember. No reductions were made on this budget, none. So we're going into the tank, even if we're getting the revenue, because we still have some inefficiencies in our government, as opposed to because we don't have enough money, now it becomes an inefficiency issue more than that.
But if you're gonna go to the town and tell them this is gonna help us get, manage better, we better be able to say at the end of 5 years, we're not going $3 million
That's the
in the
plan.
hole.
That's the plan.
Yeah.
What it is this
that's
is
what we're talking about. We're
why we're-
saying,
It's not
That's
on
why
these
we're trying to
pa-
work
not on
with
these
this.
numbers.
Okay, well, let me try it again. This is an interim step to get to that number. The first one was showing with a complete 2.9% reduction, or $2.5 million reduction with no increase in revenue through revenue adjustment. The second one is taking the budget we had, which is
2.5 million.
yeah.
taking that budget and just throwing it on top. Now we know that even if we did that, we wouldn't be able to survive. So what we have to do, and that's what I put in the framework we talked about earlier, we need to be able to go back, look at different issues, look at different departments, look at different things, and try to either tear down, rebuild, whatever we have to do to reduce our expenses and better manage our expenses, so that the next budget we see, right, Derek? The next budget we see will have those reductions in it.
Well, my recommendation to Derek is that we determine whether it's gonna be 3.5 or 4 or whatever it's gonna be after we figure out a reasonable 5-year, a well-managed 5-year projection. And then say, at the end of that point in time, we wanna be operating with some surplus every year.
I could bring you out to 20 years right now, but you'd have to do,
No, I mean,
let me tell you, you'd have to do 3%, 3%, 2, 1, no, 4, 3, 3, 2. I mean, you can go like that. That's what, you can do all sorts of calculations like that. If you did an override for $7 million this year, next year you'd have, or for FY15, you'd have a $4 million surplus that year. I don't know how you can go to the general public and say, we're going to take $4 million from you and just not do anything with it. So we need to create a management plan to make sure that we're managing our costs as well as bring these new revenues in.
Exactly.
And that's right. And I think if anybody's listening, the 15 million is probably going to throw a lot of people off. So here's what I'd ask. If you go to the revenue number, you'll see in FY15 requested funding, you have 38,581,998
In 19?
in FY15. So
Okay, yeah.
in FY20, you have 45,487.
I'm with you.
So that's a little under $7 million.
Tom, the 3.5, which is the beginning of a break-even analysis, that's kind of how we looked at it. We had to come up with a number through some analytics that looked like it might be a number that we could use. So the 3.5 was the number. Based on 2.9, based on some of the other things we were looking at, the 3.5. So now it's a question of it may not be the number. It may be something else, but first we had to do a break-even analysis and start working backwards, yes.
Well, excuse me, it's okay. If it makes it easier for you, look at the surplus deficit, total that out to a net figure, which is gonna be a negative. Add that to the 7 million, and that comes up to your total that you're talking about. Because remember, at the end of the day, when you go out to 2020, you have to add the deficit, you're gonna have a deficit number.
Of $3.5 million.
No, you're gonna have on that year, but you have to take all of it, go through the whole thing, get your total at the end, add that figure to the $7 million that's showing extra you're paying over those years as well, and that's your total.
And you know, it's not 7 million, because that new growth is not, you gotta take that out of there. So that's that's a 1.8 right there. That's gotta come off of that.
But also you gotta add the other two. If you said in 10 years it's 15, you end up with a 2, you probably come close to that. Remember, you got a deficit, you still have a shortfall overall in that projection up.
But you're also looking at a budget that doesn't have any reductions in it.
Right.
So the part of the problem with doing a break-even analysis is we haven't come back and said, okay, this is how much we're going to use for capital, this is how much we're going to use for stability, these are the items we're going to reduce. So when we get to that point, we'll have a better feel for it. But I'm just working backwards on like a break-even analysis. You know what I'm talking about. But this is how the number we threw out there, 3.5, may not be the number. It's just the number we're using to get a break-even analysis. You're not going to go out and ask people for a, what was it they said? 8.
Well, you might need 3 million this year, and 2 years down the road, you might need another 3 million. But you ought to be able to figure out what you're gonna be running the town at 5 years from now. I mean, if you come out and say to the town, we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna still be in the hole at the end of 5 years, then we're crazy.
Let me try it one more time. This is not what we're showing the town. This is the midway point. I understand what you're saying. If we can't show one that is not going to show a deficit, then we're not going to do that. That's the exercise. And it's got to be a combination of a revenue adjustment and reductions in expenses. So
I agree with that.
So this right here is just an interim step. That's all it is. And I just wanted you guys, because this long conversation on, but to give us an idea of how the process is working, because we already know with the 2.9 out what it's going to look like in 5 years. Now we want to start playing with this one to see where we're going to be. And we got the capital piece now. We can look at, obviously that's up to the Mr. Town Administrator on how we do that and how we break it down, but we need to look at stability. We need to look at what areas of this budget need to be reduced or changed or services combined or all the factors you talked about and we talked about. And then that budget is what we'll have, and I guarantee you, well, I won't guarantee you, but I'd be willing to bet that's not going to be a deficit in 5 years. Is that correct statement?
If it isn't, then if it is a deficit, then we haven't got as good a marketing tool for the.
We don't have a chance to market it if we don't. I mean, that's the whole point here. Yes, I sense some frustration.
That was me squeaking, it's okay. Can I talk?
Yeah, go for it. I'm tired of talking.
No, I totally get the game plan, and I don't think it's even a marketing tool. This is the facts, one way or the other. We've either got a plan of action or we don't. I kind of find it almost ironic that I started my term at Finance Committee with the threat of we're going to close the library, and the budget pretty much says that. I mean, that's the reality of what could really happen if they say you need to cut $2.9 million. But we also, I mean, we're going to be looking at a lot of different factors back and forth as to, the best way to reduce this so that we don't have a deficit at the end. But we're also at the mercy of town meeting too. I mean, everybody has their priorities. I mean, you hear trash and you hear all kinds of problems. I'm talking trash, really trash. And that's important to certain people. So we're gonna be dealing with that right up to town meeting and on town meeting floor, because everybody's gonna have what they think is the priority. And I really think that this plan of action between the FinCom and the Board of Selectmen and the school committee has to be a solid plan, so that it doesn't get torn apart on town meeting floor. You know, somebody says, I'm gonna hold that item, and you're gonna, I wanna modify it, or whatever the story is, that could throw our whole plan right into the toilet.
That's the, under general, where it says, be prepared to answer questions and concerns, because that's going to happen. Not everybody thinks the same way. Like I said in the original email when I was doing the framework, was my father used to say, if you can make more people happy than you make mad. That's not what he said, but if you can make more people happy than you make mad, then you're going to be successful. So. Yes. Sorry.
I'd also just like to correct something that you had said earlier. Sorry, I'm going to correct you.
Him, not me.
The budget that we're talking about, you said, is hasn't had the cuts made. In fact, it already has had cuts made before we got it. It's the projected FY15 budget that we are looking at already had cuts over last year. Let's face it, it wasn't a level funded budget. So there were cuts implicit in there. There have been cuts made over 10 years in this community. So I don't want people to think that with whatever cuts we're going in here, we're not looking at the cuts that we've already had. We've had a municipal maintenance department decimated. We've had a serious reduction in our police service, our police force. These cuts have been made over and over again. So yeah, we're going to have to do some more cuts from this budget, but I'm hard pressed to see how. Sorry, that's my other good news here.
I apologize. You're right. We've had
Right,
cuts, you're right.
there's not fluff in this budget that we're cutting out here. It's been cut. We've made cuts already. So
But
we'll make further cuts,
Right.
but please say further cuts. Thank you.
But I also think you have to look at, sometimes in order to go forward, you have to go backwards and look at some elimination, some restructuring, some, shared services, other things, because we can't survive, and you can see it, even if you throw $3.5 million at it, we're not gonna be able to survive. We have to be able to, it goes back to what I said about fiscal management. We need to practice good, sound fiscal management, and we haven't done that in the past. And like I said, no name calling, but we just have not practiced sound fiscal management, so.
You're right.
So boss, what's the next step?
Well, hold on, man. Anything else? Because I want to let you go, because I know you're looking awful swollen on the right side for some reason.
And he doesn't have pain meds, so get him out of here fast.
Anything else?
No, we had, it's just the debt line, but I think that's something we can always go over in the future. So,
Tom.
How do we have free cash?
what's that?
Is it free cash results in?
No, when free cash is certified, believe me, there'll be big notification, but I would plan on for capital items, nothing from free cash for this year, bring it forward, so.
And how about the $500,000 bogey?
I did give a list to the selectmen right now, I should have brought one for.
We can,
Larry would say yeah.
we can cover that next week, the 500,000 for 2014. I know I put it on here, but I know that he had some dental work today, and he's not doing well, so.
He's talking very well, so that's
He's
good.
doing well.
It's very easy to compare, root canal, FinCom.
Yeah. That's what,
I think the root canal was probably
he said
less
when he left the house, honey, I have to go get a root canal and then another root canal. So, but we can go over that, because we did talk a little bit about that, if you want to.
Nah.
No, we can go, if you don't mind, we can go over that when we have the document in front of
Okay,
us.
that works better for me.
And then what I'd ask is if you just hold this separately, I can email or out to everyone, and then if we want, I can, our copier already makes the holes automatically, so we can have for the next round have the actual copied ones with the update on it, so. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much for all your hard work. We also want to thank the school too, because I know they're working hard on it as well. I've had a discussion with them.
We had another the meeting this week, and we've been speaking, so I appreciate the superintendents and Michael, I business manager, officer, I always give him the wrong title, so I
McMillan.
apologize, yeah.
Yeah.
So, he's a good guy too, so.
Yeah, he is. He's very smart.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts on this? Because everybody looks real sad.
Tired, I'm just tired.
I know, I'm tired. Any final thoughts on the 15? The next step, we'll probably get another budget that has some cuts out of it and a number. Again, it may not be 3.5. It's just that's where we were looking for a break-even analysis. So, all right. Any more thoughts?
I just need to discuss time frame on this, because I believe we need to have, if we're going to have a warrant article, it's got to be in by next Friday? Is that
Yes.
what I'm looking at on that calendar? So I don't think we can just wait till next
We
Wednesday's
can put a
meeting.
placeholder in for the
14th, right?
14th,
We can
yeah.
put a placeholder in for the override.
Yeah,
Well, that's already been discussed.
Do we have to have a number in there?
No.
no, you don't need to have a number. We don't do that when you look at even with our own budget and such.
Okay.
And that's one of the things I emphasize is not to put a number in there, because essentially you're stuck with that.
Okay.
So, the moderator will allow within a certain discretion some changes, but.
The plan is, as far as I know, is that we'll have a placeholder in place, and as we're going through this process and continue to document, we'll have something, we'll have enough time to do, at least get it preliminary. I think there'll be some fine tuning but one of the things you have to keep in mind is what we're voting on at town meeting is not the override. We're voting to send it to the selectmen. That's what the article is. The override to send the override back to the selectmen so they can put it on a ballot. So, and this gets into that weird stuff like the CPC. Remember the CPC discussion? We weren't really talking about the article. We were talking about whether or not to send it to CPC. And then I know, that people have different opinions on it, but at town meeting, the only opinion that matters is the moderators. And if we get outside the scope of talking about it, then she'll probably shut down some things. So that's what we have to be ready for at town meeting, is able to, as a finance committee, explain or not. Back up, Derek. We should make sure that we have a very good letter from the finance committee in the front of that warrant, because that's going to have to be more in depth than it's ever been as far as looking at 5-year projections, because we simply don't do that, or we haven't in the past, and we have to. So,
Just one thing, it's sort of a side note, and it was from the last meeting, just so everybody knows that the community preservation did vote to further study the Tremont fire suppression system, and it wouldn't be able to come back to the fall, so.
you just saved us about an hour-and-a-half conversation next week.
Thank you, except are there immediate costs that are going to fall on the general government side because as a result of that? Or is it just going to continue to go through municipal maintenance piecemeal?
We're working to find a solution on it. This is, the actual funding of the suppressant system has always been a contingency plan. We should always have those when we have said items so large. So we're looking to see what other avenues we can pursue. One of the things was, the reason why we wanted to put it on there was if there was no other way to look at this item, we're going to have to do something. But, that's, I guess the system works in a way because you can bring it in front of the committee and see what they have to say, and it's not coming in Springtown meeting, so.
Is there any way that we can put a cap on the addition of the bump outs from the police department up to, from the fire department up to Route 6 there? The the $500,000 that CETA is projected to spend on this capital plan? Is that going to happen?
I have no idea, you lost me.
Bring that for, you'd have to speak to CETA about that
Do
one.
we get any control over that? I mean, is there any, do you have any say in whether they do it or not, or delay it?
You're talking about a CETA grant that's already been put 2 years ago or 3 years ago was placed, and those revenues from the grant were allocated for it. So, I mean, you can make some changes and such, but that's, and who knows, I don't know when that was updated.
Let's save that discussion, because that's not
Well, it would be a shame to be spending that type of money when we're going
I agree.
the other way.
But
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things, because we get, and I'm sorry to interrupt. Sure. CETA is funded by a separate grant. It is tax dollars. It's all our money that's being paid out of that. It comes through the state from the federal government. They pay for their own employees, they pay for their own employee benefits out of the grant. The general fund cannot use those monies to fund our operations.
Yeah, no, I wasn't expecting to use the money, I just was
No, there
not
needs to,
having the
it's
money.
not for you, it's a clarification for the general public. So, many people think that we can just take the CETA funds and use them for whatever we want, so.
All right.
Thank you, Derek.
Any final comments on 2015? I think we have enough to swallow. Pardon me? Amen. That's why I needed this meeting tonight. The other thing I want to mention, and I don't know that I ever thank everybody enough, but if you look at the number of people on the finance committee that made it to the all-day sessions, that are coming to all these meetings, we really have a good committee, and everybody's working hard to get this accomplished, and I think we understand the weight of this issue. Yes.
When you're done.
All right. So, any other comments on that? We don't really have any other finance committee matters, except for, once again, I would say that, we're going to be looking for a member or maybe 2 members in June. It doesn't, the benefits aren't great, the pay is terrible,
But the company is exquisite.
but you really, you get an opportunity to see the inside of municipal finance and affect it. So that's, yes.
All right, now I have a comment of other finance committee business. Monday morning, I met with the library board of trustees, several of the trustees, the library director, and a couple of the selectmen. I think I mentioned at the last meeting that the state is questioning the waiver because we had a waiver of the certification because Wareham has asked so many years in a row, and the state just wanted to take a closer look at us. So I had been asked to attend the meeting with the Mass Board of Library Commissioners. Unfortunately, because today was a snow day and I couldn't work, my day job needs me tomorrow. So if anybody at this last minute wants to take a trip to Boston tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, I have paperwork and the instructions. I think Bob White is going up as well. Alan, are you going? Yeah, Alan and Peter Teitelbaum are going, so. The town will be represented, and I apologize that I can't get there, and I couldn't even get on email today because my cable was down all day, so I couldn't even tell anyone I wasn't coming. So hopefully they will be able to plead the case for the town. Any other thoughts? Do we?
Yes, Jeff.
If you want to give me a couple minutes, I think capital planning, when they're here tonight, they really didn't give you a better base of what they do. Because maybe some of this stuff, if you want to give me about 2 minutes.
You have 2 minutes.
Us?
From the time you sit down and talk into the
He can have
mic.
as much time as he wants, please.
Who's chairman?
But I can't kick him.
We know.
Capital planning, what they do is, this was set up about 7 years ago.
I know
There are
what they do.
forms that every department has. If every department wants any piece of equipment whatsoever, there's a form they fill out which explains what the equipment is, what the life expectancy is, if it's going to require more or less employees to operate the equipment or whatever it is, including computer systems, etc. If they're going to have something that they're replacing, they have to explain what they're going to do with the part that's being replaced. If it's going to be sold, traded in, etc. So they do have what you're asking for, Jeff. That's how they do the process. What they also do, since I used to do it for 5 years, is we list every single department and going out the 5 years, and in each year we list from 1 to how many numbers are in that year by priority. And then we do that for each one of the years. And then we have the stuff we put on the outside, which are things that are very large projects that are going to require outside financing. The pier you were mentioning for $3.1 million, that's not a federal project. We borrowed from the state before. That will be a state project, and the state has already agreed that they will work with Wareham to finance the pier when it becomes there. What you have is, because we've had so many years of not doing anything, we had 1 year we did about $1.6 million. And that 1.6, unfortunately, for budget reasons and stuff, they left it as a band, which means they didn't go out and put it onto a bond borrow. So we're paying interest only for a couple of years, and just recently all those went on to a regular borrowing on a bond. And that's why you see the amount of money available as far as payback. So we're using the $400,000 that's coming in from the meals tax section that we passed at town meeting for capital to pay the debt. And as we don't have that money available to go buy new capital equipment, we're using it to pay the existing capital equipment that we owe on. And what's happened, because in the last 3 years, there's been virtually nothing done. Everything, I guess they've stopped prioritizing, because you've got probably in this year here, coming up 2015, you probably have stuff going back to 2012. So it's basically got logged in. If you want to know how much they really have, they probably have $70 million true net number right now. So you have to understand that they run into a situation where the number gets so large each year it gets pushed into the next year. So it's, but the other piece I'll get off quickly is capital planning is also charged with coming up with a plan how to purchase the capital items. They are supposed to sit and figure out what they're going to borrow, you know, pay for, et cetera, and give the town administrator a recommendation. That's part of their charge. So it's not just getting a list of what's needed in every department, it's how do we pay for it, how do we do it. So that's an area that I'm not sure, needs more work there, I'll leave it at that. Okay, thank you.
Does capital planning have an asset listing for this town?
Absolutely, they have an asset listing, and every year we get from Susan Green, just so you know, a list of all the registered vehicles. We go through it with them to make sure that
All the boilers and the generators and?
No, we have two different lists. We have a list of equipment for each department, but we also have a list of every registered vehicle. So what they do is they go through the list, because when we first started doing it, we found vehicles that were registered that were no longer on the road. They weren't using. So we got that taken care of. And if a new vehicle is bought, you catch it right away because it gets registered. Because we had that issue too several years ago.
That was on the Powers and Sullivan audit at one point.
Yeah, among others, but capital planning caught it ahead.
Right.
Because they're actually doing that. So
So we
they do have all the paperwork that they need.
And they know when roofs were replaced and buildings were painted and all of that jazz?
Municipal maintenance has some of that, but really they don't have a real good record on that. But they did go through all the buildings with Mark Gifford before Mark retired over the last couple of years. And 3 years ago, the building infrastructure work was not part of the capital plan. They took care of that about 3 years ago and got that added into it, where we had every building, they went through the list, what each building needed, what's going on there. As far as the town selling off land and property, it's really convoluted depending on how we acquire the property, what the restrictions are, et cetera. And what usually happens is when you go to sell off a piece of property, you got to make sure that, you know, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, you may not, if you still might need it, you don't want to sell it because the cost to replace it, you're not going to have the money for it. But you have to find a use for it,
I mean,
so it
obviously
doesn't
it
become
was
a total loss.
it was not a well-received idea to look at our buildings that we have that are going to be idle or underused.
Well, I think the only thing right now is the building next to the, you know, the church on Center Park there. That building there, the school had, they're out there now. If they turn the building back to the town might want to look at selling that piece of property.
Do we own Oak Grove?
Oak Grove we have, but Oak Grove is covering itself because Oak Grove has that Head Start program in the federal government. They have a long-term lease on that.
And does that make money?
The town gets money out of it, yes.
And does it a net lease? Do they maintain it?
Yeah.
What about the East School that we're going to abandon?
Can't answer that for you.
Huh?
Can't answer that.
No, but I mean, we got to look at.
He's the wrong person to ask, though. Not the right person to
Has
ask.
to be turned over to the selectmen first.
It has to be
Remember
turned
the
over.
school- Remember,
I'm just saying, there
the
are
ta-
some things out there to get.
yeah, the town owns buildings, but again, it's like the Hammond School. The Hammond School was never officially turned over to the town. Neither is, you know, the school you're talking about. The school has to turn it back to the town, then the town can do something with it. But you have to make sure at that particular school, there wasn't some kind of gift, some kind of contribution, or some codicil that says this can be used only for educational purposes.
Right.
It's not a simple deal.
That happened with this building. When
Oh,
there
yes,
was a
it did.
huge controversy because once the school department gave this building back to the town, they could never put a school back here until they recoded the entire building to make it educational again.
Yeah.
So that was a big issue.
Everything up, it looks easy.
But to Tom's
It's not easy.
But to Tom's point, Alan, I think that's part of this 5-year plan that we're trying to put forth to people. We need people to know that we've looked at it, are looking at it, and maybe we can say 4 years out, one of these buildings, you and the school committee should be talking, the school department should be talking with the Board of Selectmen about, specifically about those two buildings that we're aware of. Obviously, it's not going to impact this year's budget or next year's budget, but in that 5-year projection,
Good music.
that we could do that.
Dick Paulson had fined him $5 for that.
I'm a lot nicer.
if you listen to last night's meeting on the selectmen, it was pretty well stated that, I made it very clear that I was not gonna vote for an override unless we had a base budget, an explanation what was gonna add to the budget for those items exactly, but what we were gonna do as of that day, how we were gonna cut existing expenses, how we were gonna change departments around, et cetera. They have a plan. If we don't have a plan, Board of Selectmen's not gonna approve an override.
Unfortunately, from the Finance Committee standpoint, we have the framework. We've got the start of a plan.
You got a lot of work to do. Okay.
I understand that,
We've
but,
got a lot of,
but a lot of, we have a lot of work to do, and so do the selectmen and the town administrator. But I agree with you. If we don't have a sound plan, it's not something that is.
I made some suggestions very quickly last night, on the school side, the town side, about certain things. On the school side, I mentioned about, we talked before about busing the kids from kindergarten to sixth grade only. Yes, we can.
yes, you can, legally you can.
There's a policy put in place by the school committee to
I
bus all
understand what they
children.
put in, but the bottom line is, it's a non-net spending, it's a town.
I understand that, but, look,
Right on,
I
man.
don't, I'm not trying to get into the
No, but
middle
what
of
I'm
that.
saying
That's-
is, you have that. You have, we have the school system, we have the town buildings. If you have a high school that's way under capacity, why not sit there and look at the middle school, maybe move it into the high school, then move the minor school into the middle school and close the minor school, which has a lot of repairs, it's supposed to be replaced. On the town side, why not take all the different licensing departments, put them into one place, like in the cafeteria, have someone there so someone's always downstairs there. These are the things that we need to see happen. We need to reorganize, and you have to take some drastic measures. Because at the end of the day,
agree.
$3.5 million, and you still got short, that time frame, $8 million, it doesn't work.
That was the whole point, is to prove that we have to do
But that's the
some,
plan
we have to do some work.
have in a very short period of time. Everybody's really gonna work out at this.
Yep.
What
And
what I find ironic about that is like, we might cut our own busing for children right in high school, and yet if a parent chooses to send a child out of town, we have to provide the transportation to get in there.
I think that's only on the sped program.
it depends on what school it is too, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not everything. It's a tough deal,
All right,
but hard choice is gonna have to be made.
thank you very
It
much.
can be done.
Anything can be done if you have the gumption to do it.
And I think if everybody's united and working together, like I said tonight to Mr. Gibberti, we all have to be in this together. We can't look at this and just have, it has to be everybody. So that's where we're at. All right, any other, yes? oh, you're
I'd
not
just like to
done?
point out, I had handed this to Tom, anyone who hasn't read it, and I
Yes,
suggest,
good
I'll go back and reread it. It's the levy limits, the primer and proposition 2.5, and it's available on the DOR website. And it has some very basic elementary exercises and some nice little charts. It's pretty easy to go through, so I would recommend that everybody get through this. We probably should have gone through it before we had the meeting tonight to make sure we're on the same page, but it is the,
I can send the link
That's how you do it.
electronically.
Send a link to us?
Yeah, I can send the link on it.
Okay.
Because that's something we do need to go to, because we're getting ready to run into a situation that requires reading in that book.
yeah, so I would suggest before our next meeting that we all go through this and.
I'll have the other chairman, that's me. I'll send it to you in email,
Thank
as
you.
well as also, I think I have a copy of, Mr. Gibberti gave me a copy. What did he give me a copy of? Yeah, the immediate list.
Priority list.
So I'll get that out to you. I'll scan it and bring that out to you as
Of the
well.
priority list, yeah. Next Wednesday will be in Sochi for the Olympics.
No, we won't be, but,
What?
We might have to jump through a few hurdles or something around
Why
here.
are we on
but-
this finance committee? I thought we had some control and what we were,
well.
where we were meeting and
I
stuff like
believe
that.
a comment was made last night at the selectmen's meeting that at some point in time, former finance committees met 5 days a week, whatever it took to get there. But I think that was back before we had electronics and a few other things. But
If we had to do these projections out manually.
Yeah, if
We
we-
would be
yeah.
spending 5 days a week.
But don't make a
That's-
mistake about it. When we start writing advice and
We'll be having
and the
extra
letter
meetings.
from the finance committee to, it's supposed to be from the chair, but I don't buy that anymore. And I'm not gonna, it's not my letter, it's our letter. So when we get into that and we have several things, this, putting this booklet together for this spring is going to be entirely different than before. So we'll,
We need some AV too,
somewhat,
audio visual, what we're.
you just volunteered for the audiovisual portion of it. Thank you very much. And I bet I could get a vote of yay for everybody on the. But again, I want to thank everybody for showing up. This is not easy to do what we're doing, and everybody's been here and put a lot of effort into it, and I appreciate it, and thank you for that. There's no other business, is there?
I got no business except the inside of my eyeball.
Okay, well, rhetorical, Farley. Next meeting will be next Wednesday. At this point, I don't see us meeting before then because, again, we have to get from that second budget to the other budget, and that's going to take a week. And there will be a placeholder. They'll go past it. Oh, next week CPC is coming with their articles for town meeting that they've gone through, and they're going to review them with us. So they will be on the agenda. There was somebody else that wanted to get on it. So just that good thing they didn't bring that one about the Tremont Nail, because now I won't have to spend an hour and a half saying Tom. So, all right, next meeting time next week, Wednesday, 6:30. I'll take a motion to adjourn. Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, see you next week.
I sure would like to.